Bankruptcy is definitely a beginning, not an end. That's a consistent one that I've told people. As business owners, we collect tools. We have this tool belt, and there's one that naturally comes with owning a business, and that's bankruptcy. And bankruptcy is a tool. At the end of the day, it's one of the most well-defined legal codes that we have until Subchapter 5 came out, threw a bunch of wrinkles in the bankruptcy laws.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Small Business Mentor podcast, where we shine a light on the black holes of business growth with your host, Alan Pentz. In each episode, we explore the leaps and bounds entrepreneurs make as they push their businesses beyond the 1 million mark into the realm of professional sustainable growth. Stay with us as we navigate the journey from brute force to finesse.
Hey, welcome to the pod. We've got an awesome guest for you today. Hunter Durham of Impact Industry and now of Consumer Co. And he's going to tell us his long, convoluted story of small business ownership, entrepreneurship, and bankruptcy all at the same time. So I think we're going to learn a ton today. Welcome to the pod, Hunter.
Thanks, Alan. Happy to be here. Excited about it.
So let's hit it. Give us the quick timeline of I think you started the agency first. So first you came out of Facebook, right? So you had an expertise in digital marketing. So kind of tell us then what you did after you left.
So after I left, I first joined my biggest client for about 6 months. That didn't work out. During that time, I'd taken on some clients already from my Facebook clients. They wanted to work with me after I left. And so, that was kind of steady for about 6 to 8 months of just having two kind of rather large clients that I was working with. And then really the catalyst for the agency was actually COVID. So when COVID basically started happening, e-commerce blew up. And that's really when I kind of started to take on the agency. But the important thing is in the bankruptcy story is that before the agency or before I started the agency, I created this idea of impact industry. And that idea was literally to buy businesses, get them cash flowing, and then go and impact others, try to make an impact in the world through business. And that was before the agency started being successful. And so that's why the agency was called Impact Industry. And it was basically the first business. And so that was basically May of 2020, kind of when I really started growing the agency side of the business. We grew incredibly quickly up to about, I think, 50K a month as we were doing by the end of that year already, kind of maintained that growth into 2021. And so the first business actually came across my desk in 2020 at the end of the year. And that was the online e-commerce business. And that was a furniture store. They were doing only SEO. There was no paid traffic. And so the idea there was come from the paid background. I can add that skill set into the business. We can kind of talk about why I think that's the wrong way to approach things actually now if you go out and buy a business. But so that one closed early 2021. So then we had the agency and the e-commerce business. We started kind of shipping the furniture of the e-commerce business. And we were like, holy cow, we don't own any of the actual customer experience side of the business. We're walking into homes, we're placing these $4,000 or $5,000 couches, and it's not our people interacting with our customers. It's just some, random service. And so in order to be the best furniture business, we thought we needed to own that customer experience as well. And so I called to complain to the guy who was doing our shipping one day, and he's like, I'm just tired. He'd already, had an exit early 2000s and kind of rebuilt the furniture shipping business again. There's always going to be a need for this white glove kind of high touch service in the furniture industry. And so I asked him, well, are you interested in selling? And he's like, I actually think I would be. So that kind of kicked off that process. And then during that process, he landed a big client, which is Mitchell Gold Bob Williams, which is kind of, we'll fast forward in a little bit, but he landed that large client and basically shrunk 14 states. And so we were Furniture USA. And we were like, how are we going to be Furniture USA if we only deliver to 20 states? And so he had mentioned during due diligence that he owned the building of a competitor in town that covers a lot of the states that he was shrinking. And I said, well, do you think that guy would be interested as well? And he calls me back 15 minutes later and he's like, he's interested. And so this small, $675,000 deal, I think is what it was originally turned into this $2.8 million deal and a merger at the same time. So that one, it took about 6 months to get closed. That one closed early 2022. So it was three business acquisitions in less than a year. And then we did one small tuck-in of another small competitor, but that was just basically a cash offer.
So at this point, and you use SBA debt, right?
SBA debt for all of it. Yeah.
So between the three, I guess it is at this point, you had, was it 3.8?
3.8. So yeah, the first one was 1.2 total acquisition price. And then the next one was 2.6 total acquisition price. So I think on the SBA debt side of the equation, we had a total of 3.6 across all the businesses.
And it all seems pretty logical to me, right? I mean, you're like step by step, it kind of seems like it makes sense. It's not like you're out there buying crazy, you didn't buy an aquarium with a furniture business, right?
No, it all, and that was the thing. It's like, in hindsight is 2020. And I don't know, I'm a believer that everything happens for a reason. And so it's like, as I'm going through this process, everything was more of like, I was basically just praying like, God, you open doors and I'll run through them. And so like, for me, it just felt like door was open. And like, to even get deals across the SBA finish line is a rather difficult feat for a lot of people. I know dozens of deals that, get to the final hour and they're supposed to close in a week and the SBA comes back or the bank comes back and says, no, we're not going to fund this one. And so it just all kept going through. And so, yeah, it definitely felt like there was just momentum during the time that all of this was happening.
But obviously the complexion of these businesses is different, right? So you go from like agency, which is like you sell and then you hire and do the work. And the e-commerce sounded pretty asset light.
But SEO is this kind of thing that I was new to. And so, the thought process.
So you only really knew the paid side.
I knew the paid side. And so the idea was like, oh, I know the paid side. That's a great avenue for growth. And, we can add that on top. But then you're at the whim of Google with kind of SEO. And so if something starts to go wrong with the thing that you don't know, then it's even harder to then learn that whole thing and then try to counteract any of the forces against it. And so, yeah, I would say that's one of the bigger lessons is like, I would buy a business that it's like your core competency, and then you can either hire or start to learn the other things. But if it's not your core competency and something goes wrong, then it really starts to be difficult. And even I would say the shipping business was more in my core competency because it's bigger deals like the agency. You're working kind of with the team to sell more of an enterprise B2B deal, and you can go call as many furniture companies as you want to kind of get that across, to kind of increase sales there, which is a lot more of my partnership experience from the agency than probably the e-commerce side of the business was. And so, yeah, I would say buy where your strengths are as the core part and, figure out the growth later.
But then on the furniture side, you got a lot more, it sounds like a lot more assets, like you're holding stuff and you got trucks and blah, blah, blah. And it sounded like you're merging two disparate cultures and scaling the business almost national at this point.
Basically anything east of the Mississippi and all of the southern states. So, I think we covered a total of like 38, 40 states with our own trucks.
And it sounds like you had great growth because of this contract, but also probably that comes with customer concentration.
Yeah. So when I bought the business, the customer was just ramping up. So, even to the last day of when it closed, the customer is still only about 10, 15% of the business. And that grew to 50 to 60 over the first year of our business. So you had both debt-free businesses, which I think is really important because everybody on Twitter is like, oh, just buy this business and it's the exact same business afterwards, even when you lever it up with 80, 90% debt. Not true, because your finance team, your accounting team, your bookkeeping team now has debt that they've never had to deal with or understand or even look at. And so all of their processes are different. You used to pay people on the first of every single month because you have a cash flow positive business and you didn't have any debt to worry about. Well, now you need to extend that to the actual payment terms. If you get 30 days, you need to pay them on the 30th day because we have, debt. And so all of those systems change almost immediately. And I think people overlook a lot of those. That's a simple example. But when you add debt and leverage, it changes the business. You buy a new, different business, unless it was already, strapped with a lot of debt. Everybody kind of knew that the accounting and the finance systems were all based on having a lot of debt. But when you buy a debt-free business that's been like that for 20, 30 years, and then you transition it to a debt-laden business, people, they don't understand that. Especially, employees that, are just not, they don't have the finance background. They don't have any of that kind of knowledge. And you either got to teach that or you have to add new people that are better suited for that type of business. And so that usually adds a bunch of costs. Second, you have the merger, right? So that was a difficult part of that process where it's two businesses that do things slightly different. But in furniture, it was like, this person wraps furniture different than these guys, and that adds more damage. And you're taking both of these cultures of people who have been in the industry for 20, 30 years, like they, been wrapping furniture their whole life. And now you're like, no, we want one standard process. And that causes a lot of tension, people from both sides. It's just, where does management come from? And so all of that was a huge learning process. And that probably should have killed us, honestly. Just like a merger in that situation probably should have knocked us out. Then we got 2 warehouses. So we were managing kind of 2 warehouses instead of just 1 warehouses. So we were having to kind of transfer furniture back and forth. So a lot of complexity on that side of the equation. And then the last thing is that this big customer was just not in our underwriting in the way that they would impact the business. It was the businesses were collecting cash basically from customers, which is a liability. So we kind of got rid of the cash, but it was really cash positive because it was like we delivered the couch, we collected the cash. With this new big corporate client, it basically completely changed the working capital requirements. They were on net 30 terms. They're taking all of our resources. They're not only do you have the accounts receivables that they owe us, but you also have all the expenses that we took. So working capital basically doubled as they doubled, our business. And so there was a lot of very things that I had the agency for were able to cover some of the working capital needs, because it's really hard to go back to the SBA and say like, hey, our working capital has kind of grown by $500,000. We need a $500,000 line of credit. Eventually we got there after year 1. We had to come back for another $250,000 from the SBA. But for the first year, we had to get creative about how we were going to increase that working capital that the business needed.
So at this point, you've got the agency growing. You've got this warehouse business that sounded like started off well, but sucked up cash. And then you've got the e-commerce business. And I don't know what happened to that after. Sounded like the SEO started to degrade, or was that the first chink?
Yeah, I would say that was the first chink. So I gave you all the business related specifics. You got the industry-wide specifics that then also really affected all of this at the same time. Furniture was one of the best suited for COVID, but during all of this, so you got the increased demand and supply couldn't keep up. So that pushed out lead times like 2 to 3 months, I would say, in the initial phase. Then in February of 2022, you had the big freeze in Texas. And this freeze knocked out one of 2 chemical manufacturers that have the chemical supply to foam. And so this chemical freeze basically rationed the whole foam industry for the furniture industry. And so basically it went from 3 months that was backlogged with the initial like demand boom to now our lead times on the e-commerce side went from like 12 to 14 weeks as we were accustomed to 28 to 32 weeks because of the foam, because of the shortages, because of the, you had the supply chains going on everywhere else in the industry, industry-wide. But furniture got hit with this massive foam shortage while all of this is happening, which was really great for the delivery business because it just backed up all the demand, and that demand just continued to steadily be unlocked over the course of those 2 years. But on the actual like e-commerce side of the business, it was really hard to collect $5,000 and say, hey, we're going to get it to you in 8 months. And it's just hard sell, in any sort of equation. That's a really hard sell. And so there was a lot of industry-wide just happenings like that were all happening because of this kind of boom and bust of COVID. And I definitely underestimated the volatility of COVID. Like I knew it was there. I saw it in my e-commerce agencies, but nobody had ever experienced that. And I'm not alone in bankruptcy. There was 3 multi-$100 million furniture businesses that have been around for many years who've been out of business in the last 1 to 2 years, And so it's like, they couldn't even plan for it. They just couldn't adjust to the volatility of COVID and the volatility of the industry.
So e-commerce starts going down first. How did the others kind of start degrading?
Yeah. So, we're growing the furniture distribution business. I mean, it was definitely growing. It was 5.5 million is what we, closed on in that first year that we owned the business. And so in top line revenue. And so that's sucking a lot of my attention away from, the e-commerce as well as the agency. And so that's really, I had some good guys in the agency that were managing operations, but I took my eye off the ball on kind of the sales side of the equation. And, the agency game is you kind of just got to continue to bring people in. There's a natural churn cycle to the agency business. And so that took my eye off the ball. So then we have the kind of e-commerce that's struggling. Then the agency kind of is still cash flow positive, but we're winding down contracts. And then you have, the distribution that's kind of taking most of the time and the attention. And so, the really big wind down for that was our largest customer. That was now a 50% concentration for us, starts to get into serious financial troubles. And I think they had been in financial troubles for probably a year, but we were a critical supplier for them. So if we didn't get paid, their furniture didn't get shipped. And then customers start to kind of yell at them. So we usually were at the top of the payment line because we deal directly with the customers. And so we didn't have any major payment hiccups throughout that, our relation until June, where I get an email basically them saying, hey, we're negotiating with the bank to get you paid. And at that moment, I was like, oh, shoot, that's no good.
And you have massive receivables with them and not the best terms. So then eventually they go bankrupt.
Exactly. Eventually they go bankrupt. They cease operations. They eventually got liquidated in a Chapter 7. And I don't think we saw any money.
So you had hundreds of thousands of dollars out to them, was it something like that? So then that in turn drags you down.
There was a time in June where I could have taken I could have received all of our receivables, ended the relationship with them, and shrunk the business by 50, 60%. The team made the decision to move forward, and we moved forward with them. And, they got a $20 million equity injection. And so there's, all of these kind of like, hey, that should be pretty good, at least for another year, if we can try to, rebuild our business, a part of them as they get this $20 million equity injection. And we really need to do solid work, but it lasted 2 months before they folded after that equity injection.
So to me, this is a really compelling story because it's all very logical. Each decision point, it made sense. And still it results in what most people would call disaster, although you're still sitting here and you go surfing during the day. So it's not the worst thing in the world. So then that leads you to file, I don't know, what did you file? 11-7?
Yeah, we ended up filing personally under Chapter 11, Subchapter 5, which has only been around for like 4 years. It just came out in 2020. And so that's where we ended up filing under that bankruptcy code.
And that was when?
We filed officially on November 17th, and I have my official hearing in 2 days, hopefully, for kind of the end of it.
Is that for the settlement?
Yeah, that would be for like the judge kind of issues the final order, essentially on that call.
Okay, looking back on it, talk about some of the reasons why you did it, what you learned from it. I've seen you on Twitter talking about other people have come to you now, right, who have filed or are thinking of filing. And I think your messages have been, get out early, talk to your bank as much as possible. Like, what kind of advice do you give people who are facing something like this?
Definitely talk to a lot of people. And I think one is bankruptcy is definitely a beginning, not an end. That's a consistent one that I've told people. As business owners, we collect tools. We have this tool belt. And there's one that naturally comes with owning a business, and that's bankruptcy. And bankruptcy is a tool. At the end of the day, it's one of the most well-defined legal codes that we have until Subchapter 5 came out, through a bunch of wrinkles in the bankruptcy laws. But before that, bankruptcy, as one of my Twitter followers said, is like bankruptcy was in the Constitution. It was before the Bill of Rights. Like bankruptcy was actually in the Constitution. And so you have many years of precedence of bankruptcy, and it's a legal process. That's all it is at the end of the day, is there are laws that you have to follow in order to unwind and restructure your debt or, liquidate your debt. And after that, it's discharged and you go to the next thing. But bankruptcy can't take your kids away, can't take your wife away, can't take your sanity away. Like only you can kind of take away those things. And I think the worst thing that I've noticed is people, men especially, will do everything that they can, every last ounce that they can to avoid bankruptcy. And that includes ruin their relationship with their wife, ruin their relationship with their family. Think that the business is the most important thing that, they need to save. And for me, that is just not true. Some people that might disagree with me on that, but it's just not true. Like, I don't think you should ruin your life or get to the point of despair where you can use the laws how they're intended to start over. And that's what bankruptcy is. It's starting over. So that's a big one. The second one is it's expensive, especially corporate bankruptcies. Personal bankruptcies aren't that expensive. You can file Chapter 7 and pay $2,000, $2,000 to $4,000. And usually the court basically comes in, takes control of your life and tells you what to spend on. That's the most simplified version of a personal Chapter 7. And we decided to go the Chapter 11 route is because you're debtor in possession. So you get to make the plan. And so there's a lot of nuances and we could, spend hours talking about that. And the last one is for a lot of the like searchers and entrepreneurship through acquisition is I didn't risk my house. I think if I would have risked my house and if I was losing my house right now, I think it would change a lot of things. And the house isn't just a material asset. It's memories. It's where your children live. It's the bed that they sleep in. And I don't have that weight and never had that weight that I was going to lose my house. I always told my wife, if we go through bankruptcy, I have to get a job and we have to start over. But there was never a situation where, and that's because of the places we lived. Let me clarify that. It's like Texas, you can't lose your house. And Puerto Rico has a homestead exemption as well.
And then Florida has something too, I believe.
Yeah, Florida is 100% as well. So there's a couple of states that have 100% homestead exemption.
Could you go buy a $10 million house in Florida and not have it taken?
Yeah, same thing here in Puerto Rico. If I owned a $5 million house, I get to keep the $5 million house. And that's the way that the laws were written 100 years ago. And so it does matter where you buy a business, especially if you have a wife and kids and a family. I would have probably a lot more suffering, I think, and just like probably wouldn't be on Twitter, telling people or, sharing my story as much because I would probably be in a lot of agony. So I would say that would be the last kind of just really nuanced thing of buying businesses.
So where does it leave you with like entrepreneurship through acquisition? I mean, what is for you personally and in general?
I'm still a fan, to be honest. I will probably buy another business again someday. Will I add as much risk? No, but I'm only 29. So, I mean, you can kind of put that in perspective of like, I was 26. You have up to $5 million from the SBA to take a risk and set your family up for life. And I didn't have to put my house up to risk that. And I think that's a risk worth taking. Do I think it's the best way to build long-term wealth? No. Is it a possible shortcut to build long-term wealth? Yes. And for some people, that risk is worth it. And for some people, it's not. And for some people, they shouldn't do it. There's a lot of different nuances on there, but I think it is an opportunity to give it a go.
So in the end, it sounded like the agency took off, right? You got up to what, 600-700K in revenue, something like that. So looking back on it, would you have said, hey, I should have just started this business and ran that and never touched these other things?
That's one of the big soul searching moments is going back. I started this vision of impact industry, which the whole plan was to go buy businesses. So when the agency started growing, it was all in the focal point of impact industry. It was, hey, now I have my own capital. I don't even need anybody else's capital, because when you start to mix investing with impact, investors get a little squirrely, all those things. And so it was like, oh, now I have my own money to go buy these businesses, because it happened after I had, kind of set this vision for myself. I was going to go after it as hard as I could. And I wish I just would have started the agency 3 months before I, made that vision, and I would have never thought about it.
And what was the impact you were hoping to have?
A lot of what my wife and I have just a heart for is just like community and kids. And so like rebuilding communities, creating orphanages, creating places that underprivileged kids could, have. And that was the goal of the impact. I never got to that point. We did things with the agency where we donated a large percentage of their service fees during Giving November. We did other things within the organization in terms of how we structured it. But there was not enough cash coming off of the businesses to go and make an impact once we started acquiring businesses. If I just would have done the agency, there would have been plenty, and it would have accomplished the vision of impact industry.
So do you think maybe the drive for the impact drove you to take these risks? And we were saying before the call, it was like, if you were just doing it to make money for yourself, maybe you would have said, oh, that's being too greedy. I'm taking too much risk. But because it was for like a better cause, do you think it maybe drove you to take more risks than you would have?
I think there's three things to that question. One, I'm a pretty risk on person in general, just in life. Somebody says, hey, do you want to go to Africa next week? I would probably say yes and figure it out on the fly. That's just kind of how I am naturally wired. I think two, yes, there was a big portion of this impact of like how I wanted to shape the world that I think led a lot of the decisions of how quickly to do it, where to go, because there's like, the theory was nonprofits spend 50% of their time trying to get people to donate, and the other 50% of their time they try to find people capable enough to then go and achieve their vision. And so the idea was, it's like you take these corporate entities that attract talent and skills and you basically leverage all the resources of the organization, and you don't have to spend the time kind of acquiring money, and you can kind of leverage things that would take a nonprofit 6 months to do. I feel like some business talent could do in like a month. And so that was kind of like the idea. It was like, okay, how can we get to that point as quickly as possible to then start to make an impact by aggregating talented people who also kind of have this vision, for the world. And so I think the quickly as possible part was definitely a big factor of how quickly we can get to the point where we can start making an impact, where the businesses are self-sufficient and they are throwing off that capital. And I worked at Facebook, and, I didn't come for money or anything. And so like that was the as quickly as possible part. I also think for people who are naturally inclined to do good in the world and create an impact, they're probably not the best business people. I'll say that for myself. It's like you're up against people who they don't care about any of that. They just, how do we make as much money, and either make as much money for the business or make as much money and put it in their own pocket. And they make probably better business decisions. And I would say, that is something I've wrestled with of like, am I actually like that good a business person? It's like, I could do, I'm up against these other people, and they're going to make these just like cutthroat decisions that I might not make. And maybe I'm just not cut out for, that side of it. So I think there are like, if I have an extra $1 million, I would be like, how can I create the largest impact and maybe shift it out of the business? And they're like, no, how can I, one, make another $1 million, by cutting $1 million in expenses, so that now we have $2 million. And then they're just going to, make decisions to kind of put it back into the business or add technology or whatever it may be. Right. And it's like, it gets really hard to compete against that, when you have this kind of impact minded thing. And I think that is a learning as well. It's like, if I would have just focused on the agency and growing the agency to be the biggest it can be and throwing off as much cash flow, because as you've pointed out, the agency was an incredible business. On the 750, it started, other businesses started siphoning away from that. But like the core of the agency was like 750 at like 60% margins, sort of like scenario. And if I would have just focused on that, then I could have made the impact that I set out to do.
Right. Maybe divide it. You just focus on the dollars and cents and like just be as greedy as possible. Right. And then send the money over to her. Right.
Exactly. Or even just me personally, it's just like be as financially savvy as possible and then go make an impact.
I think on round 2, you will have learned that lesson, I'm guessing. Most of us make terrible business decisions. It took me, I had an MBA before I started my business, and it took me 5 years to figure out how to run it. And probably 7. I always say, thank God I started a government consulting business, because that's what I was working in before. And I didn't have to take any debt. I didn't have, I was cash flow positive from day one because I already had a client. So I think those are great business models to start in business. And they can be difficult to grow beyond a certain point, and then they have sale value problems. So I guess what I would say is like, I hear 2 issues that came out. One is like just focusing on the agency, realizing, oh, this is a growth factor. This is a growth machine right here. And you'd spent several years just growing that agency, making it strong. That would have been great. And then the second thing I hear is sort of like, because there's a lot of holdco bros out there, right, who are all into these holdcos. And it's very clear that you just didn't have the talent with the companies to like make them all run together. And so it's not necessarily bad to go from once you built your agency, say it was a few $1 million, throw it off cash, you're like, now I want to buy some other companies. That isn't necessarily the worst decision in the world. It's just like, who's going to run that stuff, right? So it sounded like you didn't really have the talent. Okay, it's you kind of trying to plug all the holes in all these different businesses.
Absolutely. You're spot on. I do have a quick question though. Do MBAs learn about bankruptcy? Is that a portion of the MBA that is?
Not at all. All you learn is how to drink beer and how to do MPV. That's about it. I'm sure there's like a bankruptcy law class, like with a law school, something like that, if you wanted to take it. What they're training you to do is be like a mid-level marketing, finance manager, IT manager at like a Fortune 500. Or I guess if you're at Harvard, you're going into PE or something like that, or you're going into investment banking, but you're not really learning that much practical skill. I guess a little financial modeling, that kind of stuff, but like small business wise, nothing.
Yeah, I just didn't know if you guys did any sort of like distress where it kind of like goes into that situation. Because that is one thing as people have come to me. It's just like, you don't ever seek out knowledge on bankruptcy until you like really need it. And usually you're like at the thinnest wire. And like, that's, what I said in the beginning. It's just like, people don't seek out the knowledge until it's almost too late, especially for the business side of the equation.
We should add it to, I'm trying to build sort of like a curriculum of stuff that people should know. This is one I got to add for running a small business. I spent 4 weeks on pension accounting in my accounting class. This is what I was learning. I was like, unless I'm going to go to work for some like 80-year-old corporation, like this is completely useless to me. So Professor Grantham was a good professor at UT. So I will give him that, even though he made us do pension accounting. So kind of looking back, your lesson is, wish I had started the agency sooner. Should have just stuck with that. Maybe avoided the acquisitions. Is that the takeaway?
I would say the takeaway is definitely, I could have done a lot of things differently. And if I would have done a lot of things differently, I would not be in this situation. At the same time, though, I don't think there are a lot of 29-year-olds who have been through bankruptcy, have acquired 3 businesses, have used $2.8 million in debt, and managed teams of 40, 50 people that would be in the same position that I am right now. And how valuable is that? I don't know. I don't know yet. I think it's pretty valuable in terms of like the trajectory of my life. And so did it cost me $500,000 of my own personal money and having to start, basically from zero again, other than my house, to learn that lesson? Yeah, but it also, like, I don't know, that's probably worth $500,000 many times over in the grand scheme of my life. And so I just don't know that I would take a lot of that away, because there's a lot of things that, we didn't even talk about, like business partnerships. Like I had somebody sue me, and that sucks to feel that kind of, do I think I was wrong? No, but like I got to experience basically the whole business life cycle in a very short amount of period of time. And I just think that's invaluable. And I'm really trying as hard as possible to take all those learnings and be like, okay, what am I going to build next? Who do I want to build it with? Because that was a big thing that I learned, to just like the who, and just don't know that I would trade those things back in. And I still have my wife, and I still have my family, and my kids left me, and we go surfing, So I just don't know that I would do it any differently, really, if I had to go back and do it.
So tell us, what are the thoughts on the future?
Yeah, right now I haven't spent enough time to really think about like long term. It's still really early, still getting the feet back under it. Like I said, my court date is this week. So that will kind of be a huge lift off the shoulders, just mentally. It's just like we are now past bankruptcy. That will hopefully start kind of build the beginning. Right now I'm building homeowner.com in conjunction with a local entrepreneur who's had some successful exits, and that's been good to just get back into the routine, get back into going into an office. We're not doing it in person. And our goal there is to kind of, build a place that makes home ownership more enjoyable and kind of provides the content and, the lead generation for home services, home insurance, all of those sorts of kind of business avenues. So anybody that wants to partner on that in terms of us putting your business on the site or get a little bit more in-depth partnership, would love to speak to you there. But yeah, I'd say long-term, I don't know that my vision of impacting the world through business, necessarily has changed too much. How to accomplish that and how to approach that has definitely changed a lot. But eventually, my goal is to continue to live here in Puerto Rico as minimally as possible and try to do as much as possible to impact others in the world and make a difference.
Well, judging by who's moving to Puerto Rico, you should probably start some sort of financial services firm. I think that's like half the finance industry has moved down there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, lots of hedge funds, lots of services. Puerto Rico is going to explode in the next couple of years. That's just my perception. And I think it'll be really fun.
Do you think the agency thing is off the table?
And the last thing about the agencies, I hated agencies. When I worked at Facebook, I had 50 clients in my book, and my clients would always ask me, should I go hire an agency? And I would always say, unless you don't have the time or you don't want to learn the skills, no, you can learn most of this stuff, right? Like it's a learnable skill for the majority of the time. And so like, if you have a complex product or you like have a really great go-to-market fit and you just need to get into retail doors, or, it's like, there's a lot of other things to spend your time on than marketing, and digital marketing. If that is the core of your business, you should go do that. The problem is with a lot of e-commerce guys is that digital marketing is the core of their business. So really they should have that in-house. And you're seeing a lot of that with agency now. So it's just like everything is kind of coming in-house.
It's a skill you should learn. You shouldn't be outsourcing. That's scary.
It's a skill. It like drives their whole entire business. So it's like probably shouldn't be, outsourced. That was the advice I gave my clients. And I pitched that too. When I brought clients on, I said like, hey, listen, I always advise people not to join an agency, but I've gained this knowledge and we'd love to work with you. That was always the pitch. And so it's on the table in certain ways, but I would much rather be more of just like a consultant or an advisor, because we took things a lot more from like a financial perspective. So I was building a lot of like lifetime value modeling for my clients. I would kind of plug that into customer acquisition costs. And I mean, relatively basic things that they should be doing. But a lot of these e-commerce guys just kind of put money in and got money out a lot of times, and to think about it.
I'm sensing a training and model business that you help people build the skill.
That could definitely be a possibility if I were to get back into the e-commerce. But I'd say one of the biggest things I would love to build in person. There's some cool guys here in Puerto Rico, and what that looks like, I don't know. The e-commerce guys, they just are really good at sitting behind their computer for hours a day. And it's like, I don't know that that's really me. Like, so yeah, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what's next, but, trying to add as many skills and AI and, just trying to be ahead of the learning curve as much as possible so that when I do take that leap again, I have some more tools under my belt.
I'd love to see you start some kind of bankruptcy business. You could become bankruptcy guy, like car wash guy and bankruptcy guy.
I was working with Jeff Sands a little bit, who wrote the Corporate Turnaround Artistry book. Great book. Anybody who's going through issues should definitely read that book. And I think there's a lot there, but I actually just like helping the people. And it kind of like, when it came to like, oh, I want to help you, but I also have this service, I didn't actually enjoy it that much. And so I still take a lot of calls. And if you're struggling right now financially, find me on Twitter, Hunter Durham. I will hop on a call for 30 minutes with anybody that's struggling financially and just let you know that like there's a way out of it one way or another. And I just want to take those calls for helping the world and doing the good in the world. And my business could be something else.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Hunter, we really appreciate your time. I guess you kind of said reach out on Twitter if people want to reach out and learn. And I'm pretty confident we're going to be hearing the story of your new business in a couple of years.
Well, thank you for having me on, Alan. It's been a pleasure. And let me know if I can do anything for you.
Appreciate it. Talk soon.
You've been listening to the Small Business Mentor podcast, brought to you by Alan Pentz. For more insights on how to navigate your business through its black holes, visit @apentz on X. Don't forget to search for Small Business Mentor in your podcast app to subscribe. Thank you for joining us, and here's to your next leap in business growth.